You are regarded as a preeminent scholar of ocular oncology and ophthalmology. You're probably one of the most famous ophthalmologists in Cincinnati, and especially in the world of ocular oncology. You've led internationally throughout your career, but one thing you've also done is here at home. You've led and you really helped flourish and in some senses really establish our Department of Ophthalmology here. You were chairman for how many? Two 7-year terms, 2 8-year terms, was it?
Essentially 14, a little over 14 years.
Was it when you were at Wills, and you were at Wills for like 18 years, I think?
Yeah, I was on the faculty there for 18 full years.
Becoming chairman, was that part of what drew you to Cincinnati?
Yeah, that's the only reason I came. When I was turning 50 at Philadelphia, it was really just a little bit before I turned 50, I kind of thought that if I'm ever going to do the department chairman kind of activities, that would be the time to do it, because otherwise, before that, I would have been too young. After that, I would have been too old and not really willing to do it. So I actually looked at a number of programs, none of which really fit me very well, I didn't think. Prior to the opening here in Cincinnati, when Dr. Good stepped down, though, rather abruptly, I might add, he was here for 2 years and announced at a faculty meeting one time that he was leaving to go back to California. And really nobody else in the group even had any inkling of that. So there was an abrupt transition, and there were a lot of problems that were not resolved for a number of years, and so the residency was affected by that. So when I came in here, a couple things I would clarify for you and others, that I was not instrumental in developing the UC-CEI affiliation agreement. That agreement had actually already been signed, developed by the group, and signed the summer before I started. But its implementation was delayed then until the summer of after I arrived here at the first of the year. And so when I came to look at the position here, I had only to rely on my background at Wills and the things that I had done. So I had run a clinical practice, of course, but I had been the director of resident education for a time. I had been the chairman of the OR committee for a time. I was the director of their annual conference for quite a number of years. I was the executive secretary of the Wills Eye Hospital Alumni Society for quite a number of years. And so I had a variety of different things that I had already done, but the main thing about Wills was that it was a private practice arrangement. In other words, the people at Wills are not paid by Wills. They are independent practitioners who rent space from the Wills Institute now, with very few exceptions. The ophthalmic pathologist is paid by them. The ophthalmologist in chief is paid to some extent by them. But by and large, most of the people are paid individually in private practice. So when I came here and I looked at what had gone on, my general comment to them is, I'm familiar with this kind of a situation. The only difference is here we only really have one private practice organization, really two, because we have Children's Hospital as well. So we've got a Children's Hospital group and we've got a Cincinnati Eye Institute group, and then we had a couple people that were just university-based people. And I said, I understand this system and I can make it work. And when I got here, when I accepted the position, they had a number of other people who I think were very qualified too, but they had a different kind of a background. And their impression was that somehow it's got to be back to a university-based practice, and that's the way it's got to be. And with me coming in, it was kind of like, no, I think this will work, but we have to make sure that we minimize the downsides, maximize the good sides of this thing, and make this relationship work. And so my job was actually to implement the agreement that had already been developed. Also, at that point in time, I don't think people have any conception in the residency now of where the Children's Hospital was at that time. They had had a full-time director for a number of years, but only a single practitioner in the ophthalmology division.
Wow.
And a couple other faculty people who would go there part-time and help out the residents. And by and large, what the fellow who was here would do was make sure all the paying patients would come to him, and then he'd make sure that the volunteers got to staff the residents and all the non-paying patients. And it's a long story that he was actually asked to leave shortly after, or shortly before I got here and accepted the job. And so one of my jobs was to try to build up the department over there because it was nothing. And so one of the things that I did is I really was the first person who ever actually appointed any women and minorities to the department. There had been Dr. Asbury's mother, who is a part-time person, had been the ophthalmic pathologist back in the 1930s to 50s. But other than that, there had been nobody else. There had been no minorities. There had been no women who had any full-time position. I think there had been only 3 women residents up to that point in time. So at any rate, to get this story short, one of my first roles was to look at candidates along with the children's people that we could get in there to take over that position, and we found that Connie West would be the appropriate person to take care of that. She turned out to be an outstanding program builder. In relatively short order, she brought in Dr. Young, and then she brought in several other people, some of which there was a little transition for a while, but then it gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger, and obviously then it made this transition over to Dr. Young as the chairman, and with a large staff and growing every year, and it's a phenomenal thing. So they were growing, and the Cincinnati Eye Institute people were working to integrate that program with the university and make sure that the residents didn't get shortchanged. Well, as a matter of fact, they didn't. I think they got many of the benefits from that. Plus, we started a bunch of fellowship programs, which until that time, the only fellowship program that was here was in oculoplastics, started by Dwight Coolman and worked with Bob Kirsten, and then, of course, with Jeff Nerad after Bob Kirsten had left. But I just kind of pushed to say, look, we've now developed such a big group of various specialists in the various areas, subspecialists, and I really pushed them to get the retina fellowship started, the glaucoma fellowship started, the cornea fellowship. Of course, when Ed Holland came in, he brought the fellowship with him, so that helped too. Then they started the pediatric ophthalmology fellowship, and I think all of those programs actually helped the residents, because those people also who were in the fellowship positions were in a position to help train the residents as well.
Right.
And they turned out to be outstanding people. So, and again, that reflected back on my experience at Wills, and how in some programs the fellows would take all the cases from the residents. And that I didn't think would ever happen here, because that's not what happened in Philadelphia. It really worked for both of them. And so that's really what I did. I came in and I made sure that the programs worked, and that we tried to encourage people to take part wherever they could, and I supported them wherever it was possible. And I think the rest is history.
But you were also instrumental in a number of other big changes to our residency program, to our department, that I don't think a lot of people, at least in my generation, are aware of. Like you expanded the residency from 9 to 12. Is that correct?
Correct. It had been, there's an interesting thing. Back when Medicare was initially instituted, back in the 1980s, the chairman at that time, Dr. Sachs, said, well, he could have appointed more residents, but he thought he would be a good citizen, and he didn't know that the residents needed that much more experience, or that it would dilute their experience if they took more residents in. So he decided that no, we won't do that. At the same time, Ohio State went from like 3 or 4 residents up to 8, and they were all paid for because then they were more or less grandfathered in. However many you got at that point in time, that's how many you had. Well, then subsequently, if they ever wanted to expand the residency here, there was no money to expand it. Your total complement of residents were set back at those from that time based on how many you had at that point. And if you ever wanted more, you had to apply to Residency Review Committee and whatnot. Well, it turned out to be very hard. I had to go through all kinds of manipulations to get CEI, Children's Hospital, the VA, and the university all to agree to contribute back to this thing, even though they weren't getting any extra money for it, to add the extra residents. So we were able to do that. But it wasn't an easy process. Also, working with Josh Sands, we were able to really develop the VA program. And that was going wonderfully until the VA decided to put an optometrist in charge of the surgical program. And that caused a real major hiccup for about 1.5 years, 2 years. I think it's pretty well back in order right at this point in time now. But Josh also helped to get the VA to develop the new eye center. And so we have much better facilities now for the residents than we used to have. That was an outstanding addition too. We also got some additional endowed chairs while I was here, which was an important thing. It's something that most of the residents and other people don't know is we did have a potential donor in town who had been involved in the LASIK Plus Center. And he came to me with an offer that he would give us $50 million. But for that $50 million, we would have to develop a new optometry college as part of the University of Cincinnati and develop an optometry program here. And I know how much it costs to build buildings. I know how much it costs to maintain buildings. I know how much it costs to get the faculty in that you would need to run a program like that. And also knowing that Ohio State already had an optometry program in Columbus, right there next to the legislature, which was well funded, we were unlikely to get any state support for this thing. So I could see, yeah, we could put the money into physical plant and faculty members for a while, and then the money would run out. Sure. So it sounds great, but I had to turn it down, and I tried to get him instead to name the department after him and let us set it up into multiple other endowed chairs and funds that we could support from that. And I think he did something else with it.
Huh, that's interesting.